In Memphis, Tyre Nichols was eulogized today by Reverend Al Sharpton, Vice President Kamala Harris, Ben Crump, and Tyre's family in an emotional and powerful ceremony in the city that was once the site of the final speech of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the night before his assassination in April 1968.
Looking at the balcony where Martin Luther King shed his blood for city workers, for black city workers, to be able to work in the police department, work in sanitation. And the reason why, Mr. and Mrs. Wells, what happened to Tyre is so personal to me is that 5 black men that wouldn't have had a job in the police department, in the city that Dr. King lost his life, not far away from that balcony, you beat a brother to death.
Despite the profound symbolism, most Americans actually have little historical memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speech, except for its closing line.
And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
But before King dropped those famous lines, he did something that you may not have heard much about. He called out Southern governors' attacks on freedom of speech and their injunctions against civil rights marches and protests, saying, if I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of the press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. So, just as I say, we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We are going on. Dr. King also used the speech to call for economic justice, calling on black Memphians to boycott Coca-Cola and other companies who refuse to hire black workers. He said, we've come by here to ask you to make the first item on your agenda fair treatment, where God's children are concerned. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, we have an agenda that we must follow. And our agenda calls for withdrawing economic support from you. And he stood up for the more than 1,000 sanitation workers who were laboring in unsafe conditions for substandard wages in Memphis, and in many cases living in poverty, often needing welfare benefits to survive even with a city job, while being belittled and mistreated by their white colleagues and supervisors at work. The sanitation workers were on strike for that reason, a strike and protest that had brought Dr. King to Memphis in the first place. That is the Dr. King that the right doesn't want you to know. The one America's right-wing authorities, including the FBI, labeled a communist and an agitator who threatened both the social and the economic order of white supremacy. America has precious little historic memory. When schools teach the Civil War, for instance, they often fail to mention that the first of 11 southern states to secede from the Confederates to form the Confederate States of America, South Carolina, openly declared that the cause of its separation was the failure of the free northern states to honor the fugitive slave laws and return runaway slaves to their masters. South Carolina's secession declaration is a nearly 30-paragraph tirade of complaints against the northern states' undermining of slavery, including this, quote, we affirm that these ends for which this government was instituted have been defeated, and the government itself has been made destructive of them by the action of the non-slaveholding states. Those states have assumed the right of deciding upon the property of our domestic institutions and have denied the rights of property established in 15 of the states and recognized by the Constitution. They have denounced as sinful the institution of slavery. They have permitted open establishment among them of societies whose avowed object is to disturb the peace and to elloign the property of the citizens of other states. They have encouraged and assisted thousands of our slaves to leave their homes, and those who remain have been incited by emissaries, books, and pictures to servile insurrection. The other states that followed suit and seceded, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, did so for the same cause, to defend the peculiar institution deemed necessary to the South's economic survival. Mississippi probably made it the plainest, stating right at the top of its secession order that our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. That blow has long been aimed at the institution and was at the point of reaching its consummation. There was no choice left but to submission to the mandates of abolition or a dissolution of the Union. Those principles had been subverted to work out our ruin. Our lack of historical memory is no accident. Within decades of the Civil War, by the 1890s, the Daughters of the Confederacy, comprised of the widows and daughters of Confederate soldiers, went to work shaping the national understanding of the war in the South's favor, erecting monuments to the Southern insurrectionists, funding textbooks that were used throughout the country, not just in the South, that mollified the national understanding of slavery itself, removing it as the cause of the war and softening its edges from a system of human breeding and brutality to one of benign familial relationships and contented labor. So the war on our national memory is not new. It is, in fact, an American tradition. The memory of the slave South, the Civil War, the supposedly universal greatest generation support for World War II, and the memory of Dr. King have all been victims of it. Today, the war on history is being fought across the red states, with Florida and its governor, Ron DeSantis, acting as the tip of the spear, mandating education on the glories of Western civilization and outlawing studies in African-American history, infusing religious doctrine into public school education by stacking school boards and college administrations while purging those institutions of liberal educators and administrators, silencing librarians and instructors with the threat of incarceration, and banning books that might give students at the K through 12 or even at the collegiate level a glimpse at inconvenient historical facts and diversity. It is an American version of communist China's Cultural Revolution or the decades of memory purges in the USSR. The American right is trying to impose its Christian nationalist, fascistic doctrine on you and your kids, whether you want it or not. And they won't be satisfied to just do it in red states. Just look at where they're going with their abortion bans. That is the war we're facing. But we don't have to cede this ground. We can fight for the facts. And the first day of Black History Month seems as good a day as any to start. And joining me now is Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, founding director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research and author of several books, including How to Be a Young Anti-Racist. Dr. Kendi, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to put up some of the most banned books in the country, and your book is among them. What we're seeing right now is a war on knowledge of ourselves. And I wonder what you make of the idea that just knowing the history that I just mentioned is illegal in states like Florida.
Well, what I make of it is actually something that DeSantis recently stated to explain why he's overhauling Florida's higher education system. He's opposing programs that he stated provoke political activism. He says that's not appropriate in the state of Florida. And then he's, of course, supporting programs that seem to me to be provoking political compliance. programs that seem to be provoking people to attack or despise people who don't look like them, or even people who do look like them and who are trying to just get home.
What do you make of what I would consider to be the abject cowardice, to be honest, of the College Board, which claimed in a statement that their decision to alter their course in African American studies was not made due to political pressure? They said this was a long-standing course that no one had seen and that this decision was made outside of politics. And yet, they have taken away any part of the course material that would be involved in the tests, the AP tests, that involved contemporary topics like Black Lives Matter, affirmative action, queer life, and reparations. Those are now out. Many Black writers and scholars, including Kimberly Crenshaw, is out. Roderick Ferguson, who writes about queer social movements. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the esteemed writer for The Atlantic, who's written about reparations, and Bell Hooks, who writes about race, feminism, and class. This is what... to me, it seems shocking to do that. Kimberly Crenshaw made the point that, African-American history is not just about men. It's also about Black people, queer people, all sorts of people. She's made this point that it was stunning to say that you can't even read about these other people. Your thoughts?
I mean, I agree with Kimberly Crenshaw. And indeed, you can't understand Black history if you don't understand Black feminism. You can't understand Black history if you don't understand queer theory. There are Black people who are queer. You can't understand Black history if you don't have a critical understanding of race. You can't understand it. And indeed, that's the purpose. And so I think that it was shocking that the College Board, which imagines itself as seeking to promote higher learning, seeker to promote critical thinking, would think that we're so stupid that they haven't bowed down to political pressure.